Why does the entire world trust a piece of American paper? Every day, nations thousands of miles away from the United States use the US dollar to buy oil, pay international debts, trade goods, and store their national savings. Even countries that are political rivals of Washington rely on the dollar to keep their economies running. This is not just an American currency, it is a global system that affects food prices, fuel costs, wars, and financial crises worldwide. When the dollar rises, some economies struggle. When it weakens, markets shake. But how did one nation's money gain such enormous power? The dollar's dominance is not based on luck or coincidence. It is the result of history, war, industrial growth, and strategic decisions made over decades. Understanding the rise of the US dollar helps explain how modern global power really works. This story matters to everyone because the dollar influences inflation, trade, and opportunity across the planet. To understand today's world economy, we must first understand how the United States transformed its currency into the backbone of global finance. Before the US dollar dominated global trade, money was tied to precious metals like gold and silver. These metals were trusted because they were scarce, valuable, and accepted almost everywhere. For centuries, international trade was settled using gold-backed currencies. By the 19th century, the British pound became the world's leading currency. Britain controlled global trade routes, shipping lanes, and a vast colonial empire. London was the center of international banking, and the pound was considered as reliable as gold. However, maintaining an empire was expensive. World War I and World War II severely damaged Britain's economy, drained its gold reserves, and forced the country to borrow heavily, especially from the United States. British factories were weakened, cities were destroyed, and the country could no longer support global financial leadership. As Britain declined, the global system needed a new anchor. The collapse of European economies during the wars created a power vacuum. And slowly, financial leadership began shifting across the Atlantic to a rising industrial giant. The United States, while Europe struggled to recover from war, the United States emerged stronger than ever. American factories produced weapons, vehicles, food, and industrial goods at an unmatched scale. Unlike Europe, the US mainland was never destroyed, allowing its economy to expand rapidly. By the end of World War II, the United States held most of the world's gold reserves and produced nearly half of global industrial output. European nations were heavily indebted and depended on American loans to rebuild. Programs like the Marshall Plan helped rebuild Europe, but they also increased reliance on US financial support. American banks, corporations, and institutions gained enormous influence. The US was no longer just a military power, it had become the economic engine of the world, with strong institutions, political stability, and unmatched production capacity. The United States was in a position no other country could rival. Global trust shifted toward American leadership, setting the stage for the dollar to become the world's central currency. In 1944, representatives from 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new global financial system. Their goal was to prevent another economic collapse like the Great Depression. The solution was simple but powerful. The US dollar would be directly linked to gold at a fixed rate, while other currencies would be linked to the dollar. This made the dollar the center of global trade, without eliminating gold entirely. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created to manage economic stability and development. Countries accepted this system because the US held most of the world's gold, had the strongest economy, and offered stability after years of chaos. Bretton Woods gave the world predictable exchange rates and restored confidence in international trade. Although gold still mattered, the dollar became the main tool for global transactions. Trust in the American economy transformed the dollar into the foundation of the post-war financial order. In the 1970s, the United States made a strategic agreement with Saudi Arabia that would permanently strengthen dollar dominance. Under this deal, oil would be sold exclusively in US dollars, and, in return, the US would provide military protection and political support. Other oil-producing nations soon followed, because every modern economy depends on oil. This decision forced countries worldwide to hold dollars in order to buy energy. Oil demand automatically created dollar demand. Even nations with no political connection to the US needed dollars to function. This system, known as the petrodollar system, locked the dollar into global trade at the most essential level. Energy became inseparable from American currency. As long as oil was priced in dollars, the dollar remained indispensable. This arrangement ensured global reliance on the U.S. financial system long after gold stopped backing the currency. By the late 1960s, U.S. spending on wars and social programs increased dramatically. Foreign governments began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars, raising fears that America's gold reserves were insufficient. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility into gold. This moment, known as the Nixon shock, turned the dollar into a fiat currency backed by government authority rather than precious metal. Many expected a dollar to collapse, but it did not. Global trade still relied on dollars. Oil was still priced in dollars, and U.S. political and military power remained strong. While the system changed, trust remained. The world continued using the dollar not because it was backed by gold, but because it was backed by American stability, institutions, and influence. This marked a new era in global finance. Today, the U.S. dollar dominates global trade, debt, and finance. Most international transactions are settled in dollars, and central banks hold dollars as their primary reserve currency. Institutions like the IMF and World Bank operate mainly in dollars, reinforcing its role. The dollar also gives the United States powerful influence through financial sanctions, allowing it to restrict access to global markets. Dollar dominance provides major benefits to the U.S., including cheap borrowing, strong military funding, and global economic leverage. Because the world demands dollars, America can finance deficits more easily than other nations. This unique advantage strengthens U.S. leadership and extends its influence far beyond its borders. Money in this system becomes a tool of global power. Despite its strength, the dollar faces growing challenges. Countries like China are promoting alternatives. BRICS nations are exploring new trade systems, and digital currencies are gaining attention. Rising U.S. debt also raises long-term concerns. However, replacing the dollar is extremely difficult. A global currency requires trust, stability, deep financial markets, and worldwide acceptance qualities no rival currently match. History shows that dominant currencies eventually decline, but transitions take decades. For now, the dollar remains at the center of global finance. Its future will depend on how well the United States maintains economic stability and global trust. The dollar's story is not finished. It is still being written by markets, nations, and history itself. The question is not whether change will come, but when and who will lead the next financial era.